Hello, and welcome to this Britlit 10 video podcast on the Canterbury Tales. This is Lesson 2, Introducing the Canterbury Tales. Before we begin, I ask that you give the material the time and the attention that it deserves. I reserve the right to give you a pop quiz on any homework assignment, including this video podcast. You may also be held responsible for this material on high-value assessments such as projects, essays, tests, and the semester exam. Please resist the temptation to multitask and close all other programs on your computer except those that you might use for note-taking. As you watch and listen, take notes. Stopping and replaying the video is necessary. Be prepared to apply what you've learned in this video to your understanding of the poem. Let's begin. Geoffrey Chaucer was born into a well-to-do merchant family in 1343, toward the end of the Middle Ages. Thanks to his family's position, he had an excellent education, and he studied law before careers in both the military and public service. Through his family and his occupations, he made connections with people at every level of English society. Chaucer wrote a great deal of poetry throughout his adult life, sometimes for his own amusement and the amusement of his friends, but just as often for pay, as part of the patronage system in which wealthy noblemen would pay artists to produce works for their private collections. As a writer, Chaucer took full advantage of his education, his exposure to many facets of English society, and, as you will learn in Lesson 3, the fact that the language in which he was writing had grown immensely in the previous 3 centuries. So let's take a look at Chaucer's most well-known poem, the Canterbury Tales. The Canterbury Tales is the story of a group of people who are going on a religious pilgrimage. The pilgrimage begins at the Tabard Inn, located in the London suburb of Southwark. The destination is the shrine of St. Thomas of Becket at the Canterbury Cathedral in Canterbury. The time is April. We know that for sure. We also know that Chaucer set the story in the year that he was writing it, which we believe to be 1387. The pilgrims are on horseback, but they're traveling at a walking pace in a single large group. At this rate, the trip will take them 4 days each way. There are 30 pilgrims on the trip, including the narrator, whose name just happens to be Geoffrey Chaucer. It is important that you understand that the narrator is a character in his own story. And even if he has the same name as the poet, you should never confuse the two. Chaucer the narrator is naive and doesn't always see things for what they really are. Chaucer the poet, on the other hand, is wise, and he wants you to see things that his narrator does not see. In addition to the 30 pilgrims, there is Harry Bailey, who owns the Tabard Inn. As the host, Bailey escorts the pilgrims on the trip. It's his job to keep them entertained and happy. Each pilgrim is a type, a broad representation of a group of people, and is called by the occupation or station in society that he or she represents: the nun, the plowman, the doctor, the monk, etc. As you read, pay close attention to each pilgrim's speech, physical features, behavior, possessions, and dress. Together, the pilgrims represent a wide swath of English society, from aristocrats to peasants, and from the clergy to the new middle class. Now that you know some of the basic facts, let me tell you a bit about the premise and the overall structure of the Canterbury Tales. As we've learned, the pilgrims are taking this trip at a walking pace, and it's going to take about 4 days. In order to pass the time, Harry Bailey suggests that they play a storytelling game. Each pilgrim will tell 4 stories while they're on the road. That's 2 stories going to Canterbury and 2 more stories coming back to London. Bailey will judge the stories, and the best one will win a meal when they get back to the Tabard Inn. A meal paid for, of course, by the losing pilgrims. Before I move forward, I need to define an important literary term: frame tale. In certain works of narrative art, literature, theater, and film, a frame tale is a story that brings the audience into another story, the main story. The frame tale is a pretty common narrative device. If you've ever seen The Princess Bride, you know exactly how this works. The frame tale is the story of the little boy and the grandfather, and the main story, the story of Wesley and Princess Buttercup, is the story that the grandfather tells. In the Canterbury Tales, the frame tale is called the general prologue. Although it is the most important part of the Canterbury Tales, and the most interesting, nothing really happens in it. Most of the general prologue, in fact, consists of the narrator's observations and impressions of the other pilgrims on the trip. The ending of the general prologue sets the first tale, which is told by the knight, and as the pilgrims make their way to Canterbury, other tales follow, some of which have prologues of their own. In this class, we are going to read the general prologue and one tale. Now, if you do the math, this is a pretty ambitious project. There are 30 pilgrims, and each one is supposed to tell 4 stories for a total of 120 stories. That's an awful lot of poetry. Unfortunately, Chaucer never lived to see the project through to completion. He worked on the Canterbury Tales on and off for nearly 13 years, all the while creating other equally amazing poems. In the end, he managed to create the general prologue, 23 tales, and 1 fragment before his death in the year 1400. Although incomplete, the Canterbury Tales stands as one of the greatest achievements of English literary history. So with the premises and the structure of the Canterbury Tales in mind, let's take a look at some of the things that you should know about how to read the poem. Much of what we'll cover here applies to many other poems as well. The Canterbury Tales is written mostly in iambic pentameter. In Chaucer's day, it was a new way to write in verse, and Chaucer helped to popularize it. Now you've no doubt heard of iambic pentameter. Almost everyone who has ever studied poetry in school has. But far fewer people actually know what it means, or why so much English language poetry is written in it. So let's take a look at the term more closely, with an eye towards using that knowledge to become better readers. The term iambic pentameter really describes 2 aspects of a poem. Its rhythm, which is the pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables in each line, and its length, which is the number of syllables in each line. When we measure the rhythm and the length of a line of poetry, the basic unit of measurement is called a metric foot. Metric feet generally consist of either 2 or 3 syllables each. With that in mind, let's take a look at rhythm first. An iamb is a 2-syllable metric foot consisting of 1 unstressed syllable and 1 stressed syllable. Da-dum. The iamb is one of 5 major stress patterns. 3 of these are disyllabic, which is to say that the pattern consists of 2 syllables. The first disyllabic pattern is the iamb, which, you have just learned, is an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. We can hear the rhythm of the iamb in words such as because, arrange, and obscure. The trochee is simply a reverse of the iamb, a stressed syllable followed by an unstressed syllable. Dumda. We can hear the rhythm of the trochee in words like hiccup, angel, and fancy. The third disyllabic pattern is the spondee, which consists of 2 accented syllables and can be heard in words such as football, breakdown, and childhood. There are also 2 trisyllabic metric feet. The anapest consists of 2 unstressed syllables followed by a stressed syllable, da-da-dum. The rhythm of the anapest can be heard in the words understand, interrupt, and comprehend. The dactyl, which consists of a stressed syllable followed by 2 unstressed syllables, dum-da-da, can be heard in words such as imagery, basketball, and microphone. Of all these metric feet, the iamb is, by far, the most widely used and the most widely known. Why? Well, the answer has everything to do with the fact that iambs most closely approximate the rhythm of everyday speech. Iambic poetry seems natural to our ears, and it has been this way since the Middle Ages, when people spoke the form of English called Middle English, the language in which Chaucer wrote. In this sense, both modern and Middle English differ from the earliest form of English, Anglo-Saxon. Whereas modern and Middle English are both iambic, Anglo-Saxon is trochaic in nature. In the next lesson, you will learn about the evolution of Anglo-Saxon into Middle English, but for now it's enough just to understand that the reason why Chaucer's use of iambs was so innovative was because he was writing in a language that had recently undergone some very dramatic changes. Now that we've covered rhythm, let's take a look at line length. A line of pentameter consists of 5 metric feet. It is important to understand that the rhythm and the line length have nothing to do with each other. Iambic pentameter may be the most popular rhythm, but it's possible to have a line of trochaic pentameter or dactylic pentameter or anapestic pentameter as well. A line of iambic pentameter consists of 5 iambs: da-dum, 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 da-dum. So let's take a look at a short excerpt from the general prologue that describes one of the characters, the knight. There was a knight, a most distinguished man, who from the day on which he first began to ride abroad had followed chivalry, truth, honor, generousness, and courtesy. And here's what the passage looks like with the accented syllables in green capital letters. Before we look for the iambs, let's note that the first metric foot in the last line is a spondee. Chaucer did this deliberately because he wanted to emphasize truth as one of the knight's characteristics. All of the other metric feet in the passage are iambs, and all 4 lines are in pentameter. Let's read, emphasizing the accents so that we can get the rhythm into our ears and into our heads. There was a knight, a most distinguished man, who from the day on which he first began to ride abroad had followed chivalry, truth, honor, or generousness, and courtesy. Note that single-syllable words can be either accented or unaccented, depending on the word's location and its function within the sentence of which it is a part. For multisyllabic words, each syllable is accented or unaccented according to how the word is pronounced. Pentameter is not the only line length for English poetry, although it is the most popular. Line lengths may be as short as a single metric foot, but there is also dimeter, trimeter, tetrameter, hexameter, and, on rare occasions, heptameter. Each of these line lengths may be used in conjunction with any of the rhythmic patterns that we have seen, so it is possible to write verse in dactylic hexameter, or anapestic trimeter, or, as we will see when we read Macbeth, trochaic tetrameter. Unlike the iamb, which is popular because it approximates the natural rhythm of everyday language, pentameter is popular for a much more mundane reason. It's not too long, and it's not too short. In fact, it's just right. So let's talk about rhyme scheme. Chaucer wrote the Canterbury Tales in rhyming couplets, AA, BB, CC, DD, and so on. Here's our sample excerpt. Note how the end rhymes occur in pairs. These are rhyming couplets. Now, if you're a relatively inexperienced reader of poetry, it is possible to read in a way that overemphasizes the rhythm and the rhyme, giving the verse a sing-song quality and distorting the language beyond all comprehension. It's not unusual to hear such readers read like this. There was a knight, a most distinguished man, who from the day on which he first began to ride abroad had followed chivalry, truth, honor, generousness, and courtesy. Read this way, the lines don't make a whole lot of sense, and the second and third lines sound especially strange. We can fix that if we understand a relatively simple poetic term, enjambment. Enjambment is the continuation of a sentence without pause beyond the end of a line, couplet, or stanza. You will know that a line is enjambed if it does not have pausing punctuation, a period, a colon, a semicolon, a comma, a hyphen, an exclamation point, or a question mark at its end. Here are the lines in our example that end with pausing punctuation. And here is the line that's enjambed. When you come to the end of an enjambed line, don't pause. Instead, keep reading smoothly through to the next line of the poem. The poetry will sound much more natural and therefore much more understandable if you do. Here's how the passage sounds when we read with attention to the enjambed line. There was a knight, a most distinguished man, who from the day on which he first began to ride abroad had followed chivalry, truth, honor, generousness, and courtesy. I hope that you can hear how much more sense this makes. If you read with an awareness of enjambed lines, the music of the verse takes on subtlety and nuance, allowing the meaning of the poem to shine through. In this way, you will understand and enjoy much more of what you read. That concludes this Britlit 10 video podcast introducing the Canterbury Tales. In the next video podcast, we'll explore the development of the language in which Chaucer wrote. Take care until then.